over to Kim. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the E-Institute's webinar series. This is a free monthly webinar series that discusses cutting-edge issues in development. The webinar series, Innovative Solutions for Cities, is being launched to provide an overview of cutting-edge practical instruments as well as good practices on urban management for city leaders, municipal staff, and other practitioners. The series will cover three key areas in the urban sector, including planning, finance and governance, efficient and inclusive service delivery, and public safety and resiliency. Today's topic is on innovative approaches to promoting urban green growth. In August of 2011, the Fundación Metrópoli and Think City of Malaysia jointly launched the Penang Project to address the transformative potential of the Penang Conurbation. The project is co-funded with the federal government of Malaysia. Penang is rapidly urbanizing, which brings productivity and growth. At the same time, it also brings in complex environmental and social challenges. The Prime Minister called for Penang to build density, develop clusters, and specialize in high-value sectors. In addition, the city needs to promote and maintain a highly livable urban environment in order to attract and retain the increasingly global and mobile creative class. The research team took a holistic approach based on the Fundación Metrópoli's Proyecto cities methodology. This methodology has been applied in over 30 cities globally. Beginning from a global perspective, it examines relevant case studies in regional planning and strategic urban investment from around the world. The research team then conducted a comprehensive spatial analysis of Penang's functional form. Together with this, they organized a city forum to engage local stakeholders in the dialogue. From this process, the team was able to identify 5 strategic projects representing opportunities for public and private investment, each with the potential to catalyze lasting urban transformation. We're very glad to have our speaker today, Luke Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is a territorial, landscape, and urban designer and researcher and a GIS specialist. He holds a master's degree in city planning from the University of Pennsylvania School of Design and a bachelor in geography and sociology. He has worked as a topographer and a GIS technician for different firms in Maine and New York, and has been teaching at the University of Pennsylvania. Luke has worked with the Fundación Metrópoli on different assignments such as the Elche City Project,
Okay, hello. I just want to test, can people hear me? I lost the video for a second.
You're loud and clear, Luke.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So first of all, hello to everybody and welcome. Thank you for joining. And I want to say thank you to the World Bank for inviting me to contribute to the webinar series. I've been watching a lot of the other webinars and it's a great program. It's a pleasure to be able to share our experiences here in Asia with you. I've been based in Singapore for 2 years and working around the region, and of course it's a really incredible place to work in terms of urban design and urban development as there's so much growth and innovation taking place here. So I have a pretty lengthy slideshow, so I'll probably just go ahead and get started. My presentation, again, is entitled Innovative Approaches to Promoting Urban Green Growth. It's about the Penang Project, which took place in Penang, Malaysia in 2011 and 2012. In a broader sense, it's also about the emerging market of urban solutions and how today I think you're seeing new types of partnerships and business models emerge between cities, city regions, governments, enterprise, and certainly foundations and different research institutes around the world to collectively address urban challenges that are always arising. So to give you some background on Fundación Metrópoli, we're based in Madrid. We've been working for 15 years to articulate and refine the concept of intelligent territories in collaboration with various cities around the world. We operate in 3 lines of action. First is research, where we work together with planners, architects, elected officials, and academics from around the world on research projects. Second is design. We engage in design projects at multiple scales, from the scale of the mega region to the scale of smaller city regions. We create master plans for eco-cities, as well as hubs within cities, and finally down to the finest scale of architectural projects. And the third line of action is incubation, in which we work with governments and private sector investors to take projects into the implementation phase. We have a very flexible workspace in Madrid where we host workshops, seminars, and even small gallery exhibits. We've worked in cities around the world on 6 continents. Not all of them are listed on this map, but we have worked in, I think, around 35 cities, partnering with many universities, as well as different strategic partners around the world, including government agencies and other think tanks. So just some background on urbanization. This map shows cities with more than 1 million residents in 1950, when there were 80 cities of that size. By the turn of the century, that number had ballooned to 365, with strong urbanization as people left rural areas in search of work in the service economy in cities. Of course, in 2008, 50% of the world's population was living in cities, and these trends will continue looking into the future. 2 points to frame my presentation. One, the design and management of cities has become a process with multiple inputs from the public and private sectors. And 2, successful and innovative cities can become leaders in this emerging market of urban solutions. So at the beginning of the 21st century, I think we're facing a scale of urban challenges that we have never faced before. Particularly in the developing world, of course, cities are plagued by environmental, economic, and social problems, which in many cases are only getting worse, exacerbated by overpopulation, weak regulatory frameworks, insufficient enforcement of policies. So I think that this new scale of urban challenges certainly demands a new scale of global innovation and new types of partnerships, especially when it comes to challenges such as the fact that many city governments, regional governments, national governments are really lacking the capital resources to really address these problems in a large scale. Really, without new ways of thinking, these problems will be compounded exponentially, and the cities that are inflicted with these problems face the trouble of remaining economically relevant. I see some comments that I'm being cut off. Can people hear me, see me?
Look,
Yes,
you're
okay,
coming in
sorry.
loud and clear. It might be someone who is in a low bandwidth situation, so just continue, please.
Okay, thank you. So given this backdrop of urban challenges, what we are seeing now is a rise of a green economy and the emergence of this new market of urban solutions. It's been found that over the next 30 years, $350 trillion will be spent on the construction, management, and maintenance of urban infrastructures. That figure is 7 times the current GDP of the world. So, in response to that emerging market, you see most major technology companies going through this period of transition, where they're transitioning from offering products to individual consumers and businesses towards offering entire packages of integrated solutions to institutional investors like city governments and national governments. Of course, IBM famously with Smarter Cities program, which they've been very successful with, but you see all of these other companies, Siemens, Philips, Cisco, also beginning to offer similar services. At the same time, you see certain cities which have become innovators in the field of urban solutions, beginning to take the lessons that they've learned and export them abroad and to capitalize on their own histories of innovation. One example is Bilbao in Spain, which of course went through an incredible process of transformation with the construction of the Guggenheim Museum. After that, you saw the Guggenheim effect, where there was this blossoming of cultural facilities throughout the city. Also, the city of Curitiba, of course, famous for its very strong master plan and its BRT system. As well as Singapore. Singapore is a real success story in terms of its transformation from 40 years ago to the world-class city that it is now. It has amazing integrated governance that allows it to promote innovative ideas. And of course, Singapore has now become a huge exporter of urban solutions, funding and managing the construction of entire new eco-cities in China, business parks around Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. So I think Singapore is really a large example of a way that cities can capitalize on their own urban solutions. Another example is Copenhagen, with the bicycle infrastructure, the finger plan that they have. Another point that I wanted to make before getting to the project is this new scale of cities, regional planning and the importance that that plays in global competitiveness for cities and city regions. So with the improvement of mobility systems, cities have reached today a much larger territorial scale in the context of complex networks, physical and virtual connections that offer new opportunities. Some examples of this mega regional planning. Here is America 2050, a plan by the Regional Plan Association in New York, showing this hypothetical rail connectivity, which would strengthen and support an emerging system of mega regions in the US, which could then be monitored, managed by new regional governments with new types of authority that straddle state boundaries and really look at the mega region as an urban functioning space rather than as a collection of disparate cities that are in competition with one another. The European Diagonal was a research project by Fundación Metrópoli, looking at this urban arrangement that you see here in along the Mediterranean coast. This arrow is not really working right, but moving from Lisbon, Portugal in the west to Milan, Italy in the east, with Madrid, Barcelona, and Marseille along the linear configuration, and other smaller cities as well. This was an interesting project that we were involved in. We invited the mayors from the 5 major cities, and they participated. And there was a real enthusiasm for looking at the types of synergies that could be discovered between these cities. Cultural synergies, obviously economic synergies, which could be strengthened by physical connectivities. The third region we want to look at is the Malacca Straits Diagonal. This is a mega region that we've proposed in the context of the Penang Project, running from Penang in the north to Singapore in the south. We can take a closer look at it here. This is, again, a linear configuration along the western coast of peninsular Malaysia. Running from Penang in the north with 1.5 million people in Penang State, through Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, with 6.5 million people, down through Malacca, Iskandar, Johor Bahru, and ending in Singapore. There's talk in Malaysia now of implementing a high-speed rail connection running all the way from Penang to Singapore, which would really be optimal for this site. Each of Penang and Kuala Lumpur are roughly 300 kilometers apart, as are Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, and that's really the ideal distance for high-speed rail travel. Anything longer and it becomes more efficient to take an airplane. So if that infrastructure is implemented, it will really strengthen the connectivity in the region. And in advance, each city can do its own treatment of its spatial configuration to prepare for the implementation of that new infrastructure. There's great connectivity internationally for the Malacca Straits Diagonal, mostly through Changi Airport in Singapore. Let's take a quick look at the southern end of the diagonal, what we call the ASEAN Cities Hub. ASEAN, of course, is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Singapore, as you can see in this map, is flanked by Johor Bahru or Iskandar to the north, which is part of Malaysia, and Batam and Bintan to the south, which are both in Indonesia. Currently, the cooperation between the governments of these cities is probably subpar because of historical sensitivities between these governments. But there's real potential for cross-border collaboration between these cities. And once you see that materialize, you'll see a new emergence of sort of what we call the expanded economic space of Singapore, as Singapore shares an economic balance with these two other areas. Which I think, yes, brings us to the Penang Project. The Penang Project took place in 2011 and 2012. We were hired by Khazanah, who is the sovereign fund of the national government of Malaysia, to do a project in Penang. You can see Penang here again. Malaysia is interesting. It forms a land bridge between continental Asia and Southeast Asia. It's a very important cultural link. Many other important cities close by, including Bangkok, of course KL and Singapore. If you look at a 4-hour catchment map, then you can see how well integrated Penang is in terms of connectivity to many major cities in India, China, and as far away as Indonesia. The 10th Malaysia Plan is the latest version of Malaysia's national structure plan. And here we see the 4 major economic regions defined in the 10th Malaysia Plan. In the north, you can see the Northern Corridor Economic Region. This was identified in the plan as a key component in the urban hierarchy of Malaysia. It's important because of its agricultural base, industrial base, and it also has a very large tourist draw. You can see what's labeled as Pulau Penang, this island in the middle of the economic region. That's Penang. Penang is really the heart of this economic region. Just some quick history on Penang. It's an extremely important space in Malaysia. In the 19th century, it was one of the 3 original British settlements, along with the island of Malacca and the island of Singapore. So since then, it has always been a very multicultural environment. There's a very strong Indian population and Chinese population, in addition to the majority Malay population. So with this multicultural fabric, and this history. It's a very charming city. It has a beautiful historic district that has been protected by the UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, and it has a lot of great classic Chinese shophouse architecture, the type of buildings which you can find in Singapore and many parts of southern China. So it's really a nice space. In the 60s and 70s, it became also an industrial hub for Malaysia. It's had free port status for a long time, so obviously it was very attractive to TNCs for investment. Also at the time, Malaysia's economy was such that the wage structure was very low, so that also made it very attractive to TNCs. In the following 20 or 30 years, Malaysia's economy came a long way, and although that growth was of course a good thing in many ways, it did have some drawbacks. The wages rose, and as the wages rose, you began to see a lot of industrial disinvestment from the industrial centers. So lots of those TNCs began to leave Penang in search of lower wages, which they were able to find in Vietnam and Cambodia, and nowadays even in places like Myanmar. So Penang found itself in a quandary, what we call the middle income trap, where wages are a little too high to have that strong industrial core, but the development of the cities is still in development, so it's not quite attractive enough to more advanced economic sectors. So to that end, Khazanah, again, who is a sovereign fund of the national government, invited us to participate in a project alongside Think City, who's a local think tank, in thinking of ways to effect a creative transformation of Penang and make it a space which is attractive to not the economy of the past, but the economy of the future, the knowledge economy. So there can be a place where people from the creative class would want to live, and knowledge workers who work in fields such as science, physics, chemistry, engineering, software, biomedical sciences, and health services would want to invest. As we began the project, we did three major moves. The first was to do a spatial analysis of the territory of Penang State, looking at the urban fabric as well as the landscape. Second was to engage local stakeholders in a city forum event where we presented the analysis that we had done and distributed questionnaires to receive feedback from them in terms of what Penang is lacking, what its strengths are, and how they thought that Penang could really improve. And then thirdly, we were able to take that research and begin to articulate strategic projects for the transformation of Penang. So let me walk you through some of the spatial analysis. This is an isochrone analysis. We used geographic information systems to plot a point, a central point in Penang, and to determine the 30-minute travel shed from that one point. So you see here the space that could be reached within 30 minutes from the center point. That has a population of 770,000 people living in that area. We did the same thing for a 45-minute travel span. That gives a population of 1.5 million, and then finally a 90-minute window as well. We were most interested in the 45-minute window because many studies have found that 45 minutes is approximately the amount of time that people will spend traveling to get to a job, to get to recreational activities, to go shopping. So to us, we like to look at that 45-minute window to see the functional size of a city. So we found this city with 1.5 million people living within that 45-minute travel range. We also looked at elements of the landscape, river systems, forested lands, topographic conditions. We did some space syntax analysis to look at the transportation network and to measure relative levels of connectivity and isolation within the road network. Here we begin to characterize the twin coastlines of Penang. One problem that we found in Penang is, oh, now I have the arrow working, great. One problem that has plagued Penang is that the island is very popular with developers, and it's getting to the point now where it might be starting to be beyond capacity. In fact, there's more cars on the island than there are people at this point, and it's obvious you're stuck in traffic a lot of the time. There is some pretty bad environmental degradation of river systems, as well as other ecosystems, something that we could see for ourselves, and we also learned from the City Forum event. So one of the objectives for us became to take that development pressure on the island and somehow bring it over to the mainland, which currently there's a lot of underutilized parcels, industrial areas, but also a lot of coastline that is not really being utilized. So part of our plan was to propose blue connectors to really marry these two coastlines and to bring people across the channel in a format that wasn't vehicular travel. Here again shows that blue channel that we want to activate. Possibly with new technologies such as eco-ferries, so something that can really distinguish Penang to the outside world as a place for the knowledge economy to go, a next wave type of city. Along with the blue connectors, we looked at green connectors. Currently, this is the only bridge that exists in Penang, where you can see the arrow back and forth, hopefully right now. Actually, they just finished construction on a second bridge, which is right here. So we wanted to propose a really strong loop concept, which could bring commuters around and really activate spaces on both coastlines, including the mainland. And also, of course, to activate the channel with blue connectors to get people riding in ferries and to take pressure off of the road system. And of course, this green loop could be strengthened with different types of transport, including BRT systems. We looked at the economic geography of Penang, especially in regards to emerging clusters that we see as important. So these maps, this is a health and wellness cluster. To produce these maps, we found enterprises in each of the clusters and drew lines between them to create this effect that could show really the location in a somewhat abstract way of these clusters. So this is a health and wellness cluster. This is diversified tourism. You see this concentrated largely on the north coast where there's lots of beaches, and in Georgetown, of course, because it's the historic core of Penang. Eco-technology and urban solutions, fewer enterprises in this sector, but you see them also concentrated on the island. And finally, these are industrial enterprises. These are concentrated around the airport in this area called Bayan Lepas. Bayan Lepas is the industrial core of Penang. I'll talk about it in a little bit. This is where all those TNCs invested in the 60s and 70s. And then, of course, there's many industrial tenants occupying the mainland as well. So you can begin to see these clusters taking shape with this type of cartography. Here is just some photos from the City Forum event. We had 112 participants, some from the island, some from the mainland, some from the private sector, some from the public sector. It was a good mix. We distributed a questionnaire with 200 questions to get people's feedback about different components of the experience of urban life in Penang, everything from street lighting to safety to public toilets to government transparency. This enabled us to develop a matrix of results to really figure out what it was that people who live in Penang are proud of, what they support, and the problems that they see and the deficits within the city as well. Here are some of the civil servants filling out the questionnaires. So finally, let me share with you the 5 strategic projects that we were able to come up with. You can see here that they are aligned with the green loop concept. Just run out of slides. Sorry. The slides seem to have dropped off here. Julio, am I doing something wrong here? I can't seem to see the slides.
Do you see the list?
It seems like it disappears after slide 62.
What slide were you in?
Oh, here we go. I think we ended on 62. Did we? Are we missing 63 through 67?
That's slide 63.
It's okay. If we're missing a few, I can jump ahead to 68.
You're looking at slide 63 and now slide 64.
Okay, it's not showing up on my screen for some reason. Can you see the slides? I just have a white blank space.
Oh yeah, we can see it here.
Okay, then let me guess what you're looking at because it's showing up as white on my screen. I think that, oh, okay, now I'm seeing it. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so are we on slide 64 now?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the first of those 5 slides. Sorry guys, I don't know what's wrong with my window. Can we go back to 63?
63.
Okay. If 63 is the map of Penang that has the circle around in the southeast. Sorry, it's not showing up in my sniper screen. Okay, yes, okay. So this is the island of Batu Kawan, which is, it looks like it's part of the mainland, but there's a thin channel separating it from the mainland. You can see the new second bridge, which just finished completion a few months ago, which now connects it directly to the airport on the island. This is a really important connection because it activates this whole space. In this map you can see it with a road network, but that's not actually built. That's part of the city's master plan. Right now it's mostly greenfield. So now this site has become very valuable with the implementation of the new bridge. So we want to see Penang do something big with this space. It's predicted that there'll be 1 million people joining the population of Penang in the next decade. Currently, you have a population of 1.5 million, so that's a very dramatic increase. So there's going to be a lot of demand for housing, commercial space, etc. So we've proposed what we could call an eco-city for Batu Kawan, a high-density mixed-use hub that takes advantage of the connection to the airport and really represents something new and something for the knowledge economy. Something that also protects that green buffer around the island, that's all mangrove currently, something which preserves natural ecosystems and really also ties into the new system of blue connectors. Here, I won't go through all of these, but here are characteristics of eco-cities that we've shared with the people in Penang. The next project is in Bayan Lepas, around the airport. Again, this was historically an industrial hub. So what you have there now is a lot of underutilized parcels with one-story buildings, very big footprints and a lot of parking lots. Some of them are vacant now as they've left to go to other countries. Here in pink, you see the underutilized spaces. You can see that there's quite a bit of them. So to transform this area for the knowledge economy, we took one block to show a conceptual example of the types of design changes that we would support. Again, as you can see, there's lots of low-lying buildings, big footprints, not a lot of interesting landscaping, parking lots, and ample room for large trucks and transportation. We would propose a shift of something like this, something where knowledge workers would be happy to choose Penang to live in and be able to work in an environment like this, and perhaps go and get some coffee, have some lunch, with lots of nice landscaping around. The surface parking lots become parking structures, possibly with green roofs and things like this, with some more diverse typologies of architecture, and also access across that one road to the waterfront, where currently there is no access. Third strategic project is the Penang Eco Boulevard. This is the road network on the island. You can see here the two major north-south thoroughfares. The space syntax analysis shows that they're very well connected, of course. I mean, they're each 4 lanes on either side, so they're very busy thoroughfares. They're also congested a lot of the time. We proposed a transformation of these boulevards into eco boulevards. I won't go through these again, but here's 10 characteristics of eco boulevards. Really, the idea is to take these two major roads, who pretty much any visitor to Penang will drive on both of these roads, and transform them into more of a green space, with a greater diversity of mobility programming, including alternative forms of transportation, possibly BRT systems, or even a tram. There's lots of support now in Penang for a tram. They had one 100 years ago or 80 years ago, so now a lot of people are arguing to bring it back. And also transversal connections across the east and west, so that these roads are less barriers to different neighborhoods and more connective tissues. Here's a street section showing possible transformation. Fourth project is in Georgetown. This again is the historic district. A beautiful urban fabric here. It's really some amazing Chinese shop houses, and it's protected by UNESCO, but there's been a lot of disinvestment and there's a lot of blight and decay. So our proposal for Georgetown would include more microloans programs for small entrepreneurs. There's already a program like that in place, or organized by our partners Think City, but we want to see more of that happening. In addition to pedestrianization of some of these streets, because right now you have a lot of traffic and congestion. If you opened it up to more pedestrian spaces, it would really strengthen it. As well as enhanced access to the waterfront, because right now there's not a lot of access. Finally, the fifth project is in Butterworth. So here in Butterworth, let me zoom in. Right now you see the Penang port. If I can get the arrow back here. Yeah, this is Penang port. Right now there's lots of talk of taking this port and shifting it to the south. And if they do that, it would be great, because it would free up this prime urban land, and it could all be redeveloped. You see here the major highway which runs south to Kuala Lumpur, north eventually to Bangkok, one of the most major roads in Malaysia. There's also a bus interchange here, as well as a train line which can take you to Bangkok and take you to Kuala Lumpur, ending right here. So this can really become a transit-oriented development and major urban hub. This is just another look at the space and a proposal for this sort of active waterfront use that you could see here. Again, it may look ambitious, but there's a lot of growth taking place in Penang, and the only way they can achieve something of this status is if the government gets behind it now, and instead of selling off the land for short-term profit in advance. And here's another shot of that. So those are the 5 projects. The last slide I'll share with you is just some conceptual sketch we put together of ways that Penang can think about financing these projects and actually bring them towards implementation. Of course, it's one thing to be able to propose strategic projects that look nice and could do different things for the city, but you have to think about how it's going to be implemented. So from our perspective, the only way that these projects will get implemented is to think creatively about how the funding from the national government and funding from the state government can be partnered with outside investment, foreign direct investment, institutional investors, industrial operators, any number of sources, and how they can form real strategic partnerships in a way that can get these projects off the ground and get them running. So we're still engaged in Penang now to help them to come up with creative ways to implement these projects. So that's the presentation. I guess now we can move on to questions. Oh, I guess I should be reading. Sorry, no.
Look, you can just give him a few more seconds to decide what to answer, and then I will. You can comment on each question, and I will switch to the next one.
Sure.
Okay, look, I think you can start commenting on the answers now, if you can see it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think I proposed these questions. They're all quite general questions, and certainly there's no right answer. I was actually very curious to see what people would say. So the first question was cities and emerging economies must ensure that they keep pace with their own population growth. And what's the best way to achieve this? I see that an overwhelming majority chose to democratize the decision-making process. I do think that's probably a good answer in many countries. But again, I think that it depends on the country you're in. I think in my experience here in Asia, I've now worked in Malaysia, in Myanmar, in China, Singapore, Philippines. Certainly amongst those countries, there are some that I think need to open up the decision-making process for sure. In other cases, I see such a wide plurality of input that in some cases it can become something of a problem. It might slow down the process. So to me, it's not so black and white, and I think that's an interesting discussion piece. And then C and D, competing with other cities for foreign direct investment, I think is definitely important. Hiring international consultants, obviously I'll support that as well. Second, I'll give you a chance to fill this out.
I have already, I just closed the question, so you can go ahead and address it.
Okay. My second question was about regional planning. So, in nearby cities often struggle to form regional planning regimes with real authority. What are the biggest obstacles that these cities face? Bureaucratic complexity. I think that can certainly be a problem. Forming a entirely new type of a government entity takes a lot of bureaucratic work. Institutional inertia, certainly a big part of the problem. Political differences between nearby cities, maybe, and economic imbalances between nearby cities, definitely, as you see these cities competing rather than wanting to collaborate. I just thought that this was an interesting question because I've come across it a lot lately, and I think it's increasingly important for cities to engage in regional planning. I think that only once you have this nuanced economic balance between cities within a city region can you really set up an environment that you'll be able to get investment in and that you can have strong, sustainable, positive growth. So I think this is really one of the most important questions in city planning right now, in my experience. Okay. Can you hear me? I can't hear myself.
Yes, go ahead. I closed this question out.
Okay. So number 3 is that too often in cities, short-term planning takes precedence over long-term planning. What is the biggest cause of this? Certainly, I put sort of jokingly, I knew that nobody would say yes, because certainly the problem is never a lack of good ideas. In any city that you go to, everybody has good ideas, which is only natural. They live there, and so they're dealing with the issues that face their city every day. So that's really not the problem. I think the job of international consultants is not only to bring good ideas, because there's plenty of good ideas in any local environment. Lack of financing is certainly a problem in many cases. Political apathy, not so much. And I agree with everyone that maybe the election cycle is probably the biggest cause of this. And it's tough to work around that one. That's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for a lot of the cities that I've seen here in Asia and elsewhere. Of course, being in Singapore is very interesting for me because Singapore has had one party in power for the last 50 years. It is a democracy. People keep voting for the same party. So with the fact that they've only had one party in power, the election doesn't make as much of a difference. So Singapore has really been able to implement long-term planning decision-making, and it's really interesting to see that it's easier for Singapore, of course. It's only one small island the size of a city. When you have a much bigger country, like most countries, you have a much broader diversity of opinions. And I think this feisty election cycle, in some countries it's only 3 years long, can lead to short-term planning taking precedence, which can be very harmful to the future of the city for all of the challenges that it faces.
Okay, I've closed the last question.
Okay. My last question was, what is the most promising source of financing for strategic projects in cash-strapped cities? Interesting results. Of course, in many cash-strapped cities, you have cash-strapped countries. So money sometimes might come from the federal government, but that can be pretty tough. Foreign direct investment from development aid agencies is of course big, and foreign direct investment from private sector is not to be overlooked. I mean, I think from the results we can see a lot of people agree that FDI is one of the biggest generators of strategic projects. So the question becomes, you know, how can cities best position themselves to attract the FDI? A lot of these investors are going around the world looking for their own opportunities, but cities can do a lot to prime themselves and make themselves more attractive. I think that's an important aspect of the project in Penang. Yeah. Seems now that we're moving on to questions, I think.
Thank you very much. We'd now like to open the floor for questions from our participants. Please feel free to ask. We have one question here from Kazi. Can you read it, Luke? Can you see it?
Yes. Kazi from Arizona asks, you mentioned median income of Penang is obstructing advanced economic development, and if I could elaborate. I think that what I was saying was that it's simply changing the economic landscape of Penang as the wages grow. Because the reason you had a lot of investment in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the reason that industrial sectors began to migrate to Asia in the 60s and 70s was because you had very high-skilled people but very low wages, which is of course attractive to people who are going to build factories and things like this. Of course, this enables countries' economies to grow, but as the economy grows, the wages increase as well. So then you have a lot of those companies shifting away to other countries. And when that happens, there's going to be a decrease again in jobs. So I think any country which goes through that process of development will have to position itself afterwards for new economic sectors. So I wouldn't say that it's obstructing advanced economic development. I think that it's simply changing the type of sectors that they want to attract, and eventually it will be good for Malaysia because they'll have higher paying jobs. Yeah, and they'll be able to attract people with greater levels of education, and they'll continue to develop economically. No problem.
Getting close to the closing time here. Why don't we pick up two more questions and then I'll summarize quickly the main points.
Okay. Let's see. I see MD Asi Fraza asks, don't you think FDI from the private sector will monopolize the development process, leaving the native organization behind? That's a good question. That was one of the reasons that we wanted to participate in the incubation process. We were introducing a few large investors from Singapore to some projects that we had conceived of in Penang. And we wanted to be part of the dialogue, sitting at the table between the Penang Development Corporation, who owns the land, and these investors. We want to be sure that the government of Penang is not going to lose its authority over the plans that take place there. Of course, it's a struggle because any investor does want as much control over the project as they can get. But since the government in this case owned the land, then they can sort of play hardball and make sure that they're protecting their own interests as well. So I think that dialogue is certainly a challenge, but it's a very important one. And to have strategic projects that are really going to have a positive, transformative effect on the city, you absolutely need to advocate for the city's point of view and not simply sell the land to international investors. Let's see, another question.
Let's take one more question, Duke, and then we unfortunately have to close.
Okay. Let's see, a few questions, sorry. I see, okay, so Edward Kiazi asks, appreciate the light given by your presentation. However, I would like to know the underlying principles you used coming up with such projects. We're in a process of identifying a pilot green city and would like to hear from you on this matter. Well, I think all of our ideas for projects really arose out of this analysis that we did of the territory and this dialogue that we had with the stakeholders in Penang. Not only through the city forum process, but also in many visits to the city and informal conversations we had with the mayor of the mainland and the mayor of the island, with different politicians, with city planners certainly who had lots of ideas. We had lots of discussions with people, and we also did that rigorous process of analyzing the territory. So I think that from this twin process, these projects really emerged. We had no preconceived notions for projects. There was nobody saying, oh, well, you should advocate this project or that project. It was really ground up. You saw that they all happened to align with this loop idea. It was sort of a marriage between opportunity sites, meaning either vacant sites or underutilized, with sectors that Penang really wants to court. So we tried to sort of marry those two ideas in as many of the projects as possible. I guess we don't have time for another question.
Oh? Yes, I'm really sorry. My apologies to the audience. I know this is a very exciting topic, and if you go to the WBI Institute website, there will be scope there to be able to continue. Sorry? To continue, the link is up there. You can link to that, and we'll have time there for you to be able to continue to pose questions to the speaker. Just in closing, let me just quickly summarize the key topics that were mentioned today. One, I think Luke did a very good job at providing the context for this topic, how the urban challenge of the 21st century is occurring at a global scale, which demands new partnerships, new business models, and new types of solution. And he also emphasized the importance of the green economy and the new market of urban solutions, where you have private sector coming in, basically with integrated solutions catering to cities and institutional clients, and at the same time, cities themselves becoming innovators and exporters of innovations in design, urban transport, energy, and the use of renewable resources. He also emphasized the importance of regional planning to be able to address these global problems and some of the new coalitions that are coming up. He mentioned RPA, he mentioned the new design is happening along the sort of Penang region. All of this you'll be able to see and learn more from the website. In addition, then, he mentioned the context of Malaysia. Malaysia is, as you know, a middle-income country. It's now entering a middle-income trap. Consequently, it's trying to look for strategies to be able to move higher up the value chain. Currently, 3/4 of the economic growth of the country is being generated by 3 to 4 cities, Penang being one of them. And hence, this project in Penang is really to see how Penang can can reposition itself and to improve its competitiveness, and how this project that Luke mentioned is really a project of examining how the use of spatial analysis to be able to create a new cartography, a map of economic clusters, how they're able to then discuss this with multi-stakeholders, and on the basis of this come up with what I would consider transformational and strategic projects. He described those in detail, and finally he closed with a discussion, or at least a thinking forward of how one could possibly finance these programs, and that coming through a combination of FDI, institutional investors, government, and so forth. I think this is a very rich topic, and clearly requires additional time and for more active discussion and references. We hope that you were able to enjoy and profit from this webinar, and we'd like you to please fill out very quickly this poll up here. It would help us to improve our webinars in the future. That I'd also like to our next and upcoming event, which will be which is entitled Lessons from Brazil: Scaling Up Slum Upgrading and Prevention Through National Policies and Programs. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you, Luke.